Hi everyone, welcome to Daisy Stalls. In this video, I'm going to be taking you along as I plan, customize, and paint this model horse. Now this isn't directly a tutorial, it's more of a process video, but I hope you'll be able to pick up some tips and tricks along the way. So I hope you enjoy the video and let's get started. So the base I'm using for this project is going to be the Collecta British Spotted Mare. I especially like the face mold of this model, and she's also a very ideal size for my Bellevilleys. I also wanted to reposition her head and neck, but I wasn't really sure what I was going for. At first I thought I wanted kind of more of a distressed expression, with her head high and her ears back, but after some thoughts I decided to scrap that idea and go for a more relaxed and natural looking head pose instead. So starting off, I cut off the tail, head, and neck with a jeweler's saw. Then I drilled a couple holes in the base of the neck and also the head so I can anchor the armature wire. Then I tried to gauge the length for the neck, which can be a challenge, and I've definitely made very giraffe-necked horses in the past. When I had decided on a position for the neck, I mixed up some 2-part epoxy and applied it to the wire at the base of the head and neck. I also went ahead and folded up some foil and blocked out the neck with it. At this point, I realized one of her legs were kind of warped, which resulted in her being very wobbly. So by boiling up some water and dipping the leg in it, I'm trying to soften the plastic and try to retrain it to be straight. Here I'm dipping the leg in hot water for about 20 seconds, then running it under cold water and doing this several times until the leg is straight. After all of that, she's still a tiny bit wobbly, but it's a lot better than before, so I'm pleased. Now I used some epoxy to resculpt parts of the face that were removed due to me cutting off the mane. It was honestly very hard to get it symmetrical on both sides, but I tried my best and I think it turned out pretty nice. Now once again we're going to be using the epoxy and I'm going to start blocking out the neck. I thoroughly mix equal parts of A and B and then we can get to work. This is what she looks like after the first layer of epoxy. This layer is not pretty, but it's just to get the general shape of the neck down. In preparation for adding her real mane, I'm going to cut a slit down the neck where the hair would naturally sit. Now since I am going to sculpt new ears, I need a strong base for them so they hopefully don't break off. So I'm going to drill 2 holes into the head so I can insert a wire to make a strong base for the ears. And here, disaster struck. My drill bit broke off and got stuck inside the horse's head. After several minutes of trying and trying, I did actually manage to pull it out. Phew! Now, back to the ears. I inserted a thick armature wire into both of the holes. Then I formed a small knot very close to the head. Then again, I used my 2-part epoxy glue to secure the wire. When the epoxy has completely hardened, I'm going to continue on sculpting and adding more details. I also inserted a thin piece of cardboard into where the mane is going to be, just to prevent me from sculpting over it. After quite a while of sculpting, I'm pretty happy with how the neck looks. Now for the ears. I decided that the wire bases were a little bit too big, so I just cut them down a little bit with some wire cutters. I had quite the struggle with these ears because I've never sculpted ears before and I really didn't know how to do it. But eventually I did come up with something that worked pretty well. So I started by sculpting around the wire base. Then I rolled out this little shape and then I flattened it as much as possible. Then I sculpted that around the little knob that we just sculpted around the wire. Then after a while of sculpting, trying and failing, I finally got a result that I did like. Now this doesn't look great, but in preparation for making the tail, I went ahead and drilled a hole into her behind. Then with small amounts of epoxy, I went ahead and smoothed out her behind area, as I wasn't able to get it completely smooth with just sandpaper. Now I wanted to add realism and sculpt on the actual butt, you could say too, but you ended up not seeing it under the tail anyways, so it was a waste. I also went ahead and sculpted the tailbone onto a thick piece of wire, which I'm going to glue the hair on later. Now that the sculpting is complete, I went ahead and started sanding. Then, when I'm finally pleased with the sanding, I get out my primer. This is actually my first time using a primer ever. I've heard it's very beneficial to use though, because you can use sandpaper on it after you've sprayed. Before priming, I gave my model a quick wash in water just to get rid of any dust from sanding. And then in a well-ventilated area, I sprayed on the first layer. Also, please do not forget to wear a filtration mask, as the fumes are really not good for you. Then after a couple layers of the primer had dried, I picked out a few spots that weren't as smooth as I wanted them to be, and sanded them down with some sanding paper. Then after a bajillion layers of primer, I finally reached the opacity that I wanted to, but unfortunately I did lose some details, especially around the muzzle, but I thought it wouldn't be a huge deal, so I just continued on. Now for the color of the horse. First, I really wanted a westernish horse, so I really wanted to do a bay roan, but the thought of hair by hair roaning really scared me away, so I landed on a bay Tobiano. The inspiration for this color choice was Alyssa Moran's pony Bomber. He's just the cutest boy and I really like his coat, so the markings especially are inspired by him. Starting with acrylics, I'm painting on a very thin coat of light brown. It's also worth mentioning that in between every coat of acrylics, I'm putting her underneath this box to dry to prevent any dust from settling on her. After about 3 or 4 coats, I achieved my desired color, but unfortunately some dust did settle on her. I'm not really sure how it happened, but I'm confident I can cover it up because I'm using pastels next. Using Gallery by Mungyo soft pastels, I'm going to shave them into this bottle cap, and for this layer I'm using mostly browns and oranges. I found that using a small mesh like this makes pastel shaving a lot easier. Now right here is where I make the mistake of the century. So instead of mixing the first layer of pastel with white like I always do, I decided to just put that dark color on that light color horse. But at the time I didn't suspect a thing, so I just went ahead and sealed it. And when I came back, the color wasn't that bad. It was a bit grainy, but it wasn't too bad. But on top of it all, I tipped the horse over while I was spraying and left this giant mark. Now this failure actually led me to lose all motivation to continue on her for an entire month. I considered stripping her completely, but I didn't have anything that worked, so I decided to just take a break from her because I didn't want to lose more motivation by working on a project that I wasn't really feeling. But then after an entire month, I got a lot of new inspiration, so I decided to finally start working on her again. I unfortunately don't have the footage of this layer, but I used a lot of dark brown and just darkened the areas that are going to be very dark, and also used black on the lower legs. And basically all the layers just consist of darkening the areas that are going to be darker and leaving the areas that are going to be lighter just untouched by the pastels. This is after the 4th layer, I believe. And also note that I'm spraying in between every layer of pastels with my Liquitex matte varnish. Now the color is honestly a bit grainy still, but there's still some darkening left to do, so I'm crossing my fingers I can cover it up. I have a color reference off screen, which is so helpful when repainting a horse. I realized that some of her lighter spots were a bit more colder tone than I would like, so I covered them in a lot of orange and then sprayed. Here you can really see the drastic difference spraying makes. It's important to keep in mind that pastels darken when you spray, so you don't unintentionally make a model a lot darker. Finally, I gave her one more layer of orange, then I gave her 2 more layers of sealant. And here's the final color I achieved with the pastels. I am definitely pleased with it. It's a nice chocolatey bay color, but I was aiming for something a little bit lighter, but in order to get rid of the graininess I had to go a bit darker, but I am overall very pleased with the color. Now on to the endeavors of the markings. First I tried to do a hair by hair blaze with a watercolor pencil, but it did not work out, so I just switched to acrylics. Then while closely looking at reference pictures, I started painting on the markings. One thing that's really neat about working with acrylic paint is that if you mess up, you can just wipe it right off with a damp cloth. When I was working with the pastels, I tried to make her muzzle light gray, but it darkened a lot when I sprayed her, so now using some acrylic paint I'm going to try to lighten her muzzle just a little bit. Now for the hooves. Since she has stockings on all of her legs, I'm painting all of the hooves in a very dusty pinkish color. And while that paint is still wet, I'm painting stripes of gray and brown to make the hooves look more natural. I unfortunately did not get any footage of me painting the eye, but here's a really good step-by-step picture that I found really helpful. But now her coat is officially done, so I gave her a couple good sprays of the sealant, and now it's time to work on the mane. For this horse I'm going to be using acrylic yarn wefts, which if you want to know how to make, I will direct you over to Mozekytos channel. She has a really good video tutorial on how to make them. Making yarn here is so satisfying because look at those shiny wefts. So anyways, I followed the tutorial and made wefts in both black and creamy white. Then I started applying the wefts piece by piece to the tail and letting each layer dry completely before applying the next one. Now for the very last piece, I'm not using a weft with a glue base. I'm just applying a little bit of glue to the underside of the hairs. Then I put some more watered down glue on top just to make sure that no hairs fall out. And by now the tail's done, but it's way too thick, so I started cutting and feathering the tail to make it look more realistic and also make it thinner. But I also knew I could easily mess this up, so it was very daunting to cut. Then, probably a whole hour of feathering later, I'm finally done and I'm very pleased with it. Then I started gluing on the mane into that slit that we made before. Then when I was done with that, it looked like an absolutely crazy anime character or something, but I went ahead and glued on the forelock, which is just a weft that is glued to be very narrow at the end. Then after a light trim, I applied a small amount of water to the mane and then wrapped it with Saran wrap to make it behave. After realizing that only water was never going to work, I turned to Instagram and a fellow follower told me to use glue and water, so I tried that and it worked well. Here you can see the mane still lays flat, but looks quite natural, which I'm really happy about. I actually really like the mane long like this, but I decided I wanted more of a typical English riding pony look, so I decided to cut the mane short. So then, after a little bit more trimming, my custom pony is finally done. I think this is actually my most tedious custom because looking back, from starting the model to finishing this video, it has been 3 months, which is kind of crazy. But in all honesty, I'm so happy with this model. I think she turned out amazing, and I'm really happy I chose real mane for her. For the name of this pony, it's been really hard choosing, but I think I've landed on Marmalade? Maybe? I also had to assign her a new breed, and after turning to Instagram for advice, I have decided that she mostly resembles a Liquitex pony. I'm not sure I pronounced that right, but yeah, you get it. Anyways, I know this video has been a long time coming, and I really hope it lived up to your expectations. And yeah, let me know what you think about her and the video down below in the comments. Also, oh my goodness, thank you so much for 14K, that is crazy! But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!